Hey everybody! In this video, we are going to talk about peeking in Fortnite. Peeks are the single best thing to learn in Fortnite. And I know that in the past I've said that learning how to aim is where most players should start, but since then I've realized that understanding and using peeks the right way, that's way more important. It doesn't matter how good your aim is, how good your movement is, and if you play build mode, it doesn't matter how fast your builds and edits are. If you don't understand peeks and how to use them, you cannot win fights decisively. And that's the beauty of Fortnite, right? Especially if you use builds and edits, you can win fights against whole teams without taking any damage, but only if you know how to peek.
Oh, you like that?
So to start, let's talk about what peeks are. A peek happens every time you move out from behind cover to shoot a player. If you're standing still, that's not a peek.
Interesting.
If you're moving slowly, that is a peek, but it's not the best peek. Good peeks are fast, and they need to be fast because of something called peeker's advantage.
What are you doing there?
Some of you may have heard of that phrase, peeker's advantage. Now, this is not related to right-hand peek or left-hand peek in Fortnite. But for those of you who are new to the game, in Fortnite, when you peek from the right side of cover like this, you can shoot your opponent, but they can't shoot you. That's important on its own, but peeker's advantage is different. Peeker's advantage is all about the nature of online multiplayer games. With any online game you play, there's always a difference between what you see on your screen and what your opponent sees on their screen.
Oh yeah, that's peeker's advantage, because on his screen, he didn't even see me, he just died.
Games don't work the same as real life. There's always a delay, and to demonstrate that, let's watch this split screen view. To record this clip, I had Fortnite running on two different computers. I recorded at the exact same time in this split screen view. What you see here is exactly what was happening in real life on both screens. Both of these players have normal ping. It's what, 25 to 30 ping. And if we slow down this moment where the player on the right side is left-hand peeking that player on the left side of the screen, what we can see is the left-hand peek beats the right-hand peek because of peeker's advantage.
All right, so let's take a look. Player on the right's doing the peeking. Look at that. So on the right side of the screen, this is where you can shoot from on the left-hand peek, but on the left side of the screen, I can't even see that player yet. Right side is already ready to shoot, left side can't see. And that's a right-hand peek that you see. And yet the left-hand peek is stronger because he's the player doing the peeking. Let's really slow that down just to this point where I'm able to shoot. There it is. Left-hand peek is capable of hitting a headshot. And in real life, the defending player who's standing still doesn't have a chance to react. In real life, that left-hand peek happens first, which gives that player a huge advantage in the fight because they're shooting a sitting duck. Every time you peek out, your opponent cannot possibly react. And then remember, there's also natural human reaction time stacked on top of this. So that delay is already pretty large. Add on another 200 milliseconds average for human visual reaction time. That's nuts. You have nearly a full half second to line up your shot and shoot before it's possible for the player around that corner standing still to react. So if you're ever dying and it seems like your opponent is just so much faster than you, it's probably because you're standing still and you're letting them peek you. You gotta be moving, man. Gotta be moving.
So of course here, if you move quickly with a right-hand peek, that will always be better and safer than a left-hand peek. The reason I recorded this though was to show that a player standing still on a right-hand peek is still going to get beat by a player who moves from a left-hand peek. Peeker's advantage is a really difficult idea to understand and to put into words, so hopefully this helps you visualize what that looks like. Just in general, you need to make sure that you are always peeking. Make sure that every time you're about to open up an edit, you're safely hidden behind cover, you're giving yourself space to pull out your shotgun, and then making sure that you are the player moving out from behind cover to peek your opponent rather than allowing them to peek against you. The second thing to think about while you're working on your peeks is the distance from the peek angle. In general, whenever you peek, you want to be closer to the peek angle than your opponent. For example, let's say a player is peeking from behind this wall. If the player peeks from too far away, the player on the other side of the wall can left-hand peek and get peeker's advantage over that player who has the right-hand peek. But if we flip that around, once that player on the right-hand peek is standing closer to the wall than the enemy player, The right-hand peeker now has peeker's advantage, because that player on the far side of the wall is standing too far away to get behind cover fast enough. This can be another tricky thing to wrap your brain around. You always need to be focused on what the peek angle is during a fight. When you're box fighting, there are all sorts of angles, and whenever you peek, you just need to make sure that your peek angle is closer to you than to your opponent. Finally, now that we understand peeker's advantage and staying closer to the peek angle than your opponent, we can get into the actual technique for peeking, because even if you understand this stuff, you still might make simple mistakes with how you peek out from cover. There is a best way to peek, and it looks a little bit like this. Most players peek by just strafing to the right, shooting, and then strafing to the left to get back behind cover. You can get behind cover a lot more quickly if, instead of strafing to the left, you crouch, turn, and run forward. This is because crouching and running forward is faster than standing up and strafing to the left. Crouching also allows you to move the position of your head. Look at this player spinning around while standing up. I'm never going to miss that shot, but if the player's crouching, I have to think a little bit harder about my aim. Here we can see two examples of peeks. In this first example, this is how most players peek. It's very easy for me to shoot the player. And I'm intentionally over peeking in this situation, but look at what happens when I start using my peeking technique. By crouching, snapping my crosshair to the left, and running forward, I can move my character model off of my opponent's screen much sooner. Now that we're getting into the specific peeking technique that you need to employ, there are a couple more things to think about. And the first is exactly how far away from the wall should you stand? If you're standing too close to the peek angle, your opponent might be able to see you and shoot you. To visualize the most optimal distance away from that peek angle, what you can do is press yourself against the wall and start holding your targeting button to aim down sights. From here, slowly back away from the wall until you see your shotgun pull up to your shoulder. This is a good distance from the wall to stand for any of your right-hand peeks. From this position, once I move out to the right, I can shoot my opponent, but they cannot shoot me. The last piece you need to add on to this is to make sure that you very quickly hold your targeting key before you shoot. And this isn't to make you more accurate, and you should not be holding targeting as you approach the angle because you want to peek quickly. It's just a very quick, almost a tap of that targeting key to make sure that you tuck your elbow. This is the difference between taking 125 damage from a shotgun compared with taking no damage at all. Then finally, once you've actually shot, this is where you need to crouch, turn to your left, and run forward. This is going to look the same on a right-hand peek or a left-hand peek. With a left-hand peek, you'll follow all of those steps, except you don't need to use your targeting key. I don't need to tuck my elbow on a left-hand peek, so there's no reason to aim down sights. This same technique can be used peeking from behind a cone, jumping behind a peanut butter wall at it, crouch peeking on top of a ramp. You should be trying to use this peeking technique whenever you possibly can. To practice your peeks, there's a really good creative map called Skavook Aim Trainer, which includes a peek course, and I'll include that map code in the video description if you guys would like to check it out. Once you practice that specific peeking technique, I'd recommend going straight into Battle Royale and trying to keep two things in mind. The first is that you always need to be peeking. Remember peeker's advantage. You need to abuse that as much as you possibly can. Take advantage of that difference between what you see on your screen and what your opponent sees on theirs. The second thing to keep in mind is how far from the wall should you stand? And the answer depends on your opponent. If your opponent is closer to the peek angle than you, it means you need to back up and create a new peek angle that is closer to you than it is to the enemy player. Hopefully this is all starting to make sense to you guys. If you're running into any problems with this, or you need a better explanation, feel free to reach out to me on my coaching Discord channel, which I'll also have linked in the video description. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys for hanging out with me during my live streams on Twitch as well. That's always a lot of fun, and I love doing these kinds of demonstrations for you guys while I'm live streaming. Thank you all so much for using code Billy-Bicep in the item shop, and I will see you guys very soon in the next video.
Yep.